All right, good evening, everyone. So we begin with the normal prayer. Our Heavenly Kings, Comforter, Spirit of Truth, wherever you're present, fills all things, treasury of blessings and giver of life, come and dwell in us and cleanse us from every impurity, save our souls from one. Yes, I'd like to say a couple of things first before we begin about, the way ahead. You probably realize that we're getting pretty close to the end of the four Gospels. I'm pretty confident that tonight's session is the second last session. We'll be able to finish it next time completely. Unless I decide to tack on some sort of retrospective views of the scholarship, biblical scholarship, about the Gospels. We'll see. Now, so unfortunately, it would have been nice if we could finish it before Easter, but it's not going to happen because of just the next few Sundays nights just don't work for me because of services here at church. And then there'll be something else. So there's going to be quite a big break between now and our possibly final session for the four Gospels. However, there's still a lot of the New Testament left. And I plan to continue with that. So, we're going to get into the book of Acts and the letters of the apostles. And we'll probably follow the traditional Orthodox layout of the New Testament, which is a bit different to the way it's done in, for instance, the King James Bible. The order of the books. I have something in mind that I might possibly do before we begin the book of Acts, Acts of the Apostles, and that is to have a series, a short series, probably, I don't know, 3 sessions, something like that. Depends how it goes, but sort of like 3 sessions on YouTube on marriage and the relationship of the husband and the wife, and then I might, if there's any interest in that topic that generates some interest, we might take it away from YouTube, because YouTube is not so good for interactive work. So I might then invite people, a much smaller group, to have an interactive, if there is need for that, some interactive sessions and questions on Zoom. But then we'll still continue our regular New Testament stuff. So we'll begin the book of Acts. Right. But tonight, now I sent some topics via Costa, but I realized that I needed to insert a couple of little topics before the list that I sent. So the additional 2 topics are the angels and the women. That's something we're going to read about in Mark chapter 16, verses 5 to 8, just now. Then from the Gospel of John, about Mary Magdalene at the tomb and so on. That's chapter 20, verses 1 to 18. Then those topics that I sent out. So there were 4 of those. So now we've got 6 topics. I just hope we finish them all tonight. But they're all fairly small topics. Okay, so the third one is deceit of the Jewish authorities in Matthew chapter 28, verses 11 to 15. Then number 4, which I've called the road to Emmaus. Okay, it's a bit like the road to Damascus. But that's something much later in the book of Acts. That's Emmaus, that's in Luke chapter 24, verses 13 to 35. Then Jesus appears to 10 disciples. It just follows on from that section in Luke. So in the same chapter 24, from verse 36 to 49. And the last, that's where we'll stop. Yeah, because I was going to have Thomas the twin, but now I think if we include that, it'll be a bit too long. So that'll have to stay for the last session. So I better make note of that. Oh, I will know. All right, so to Mark chapter 16. Uh, 16. Verses 5 to 8. So there we go. And entering the tomb, they saw a young man clothed in a long white robe, sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. But he said to them, "Do not be alarmed. You seek Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He is risen. He is not here. See the place where they laid him. But go tell his disciples and Peter that he is going before you into Galilee, that you will see him. There you will see him, as he said to you." So they went out quickly and fled from the tomb, for they trembled and were amazed, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. So, first of all, note that the angel says his disciples and Peter. Now, in the medieval times, the scholastic Roman theologians did a lot of work in sort of saying that, well, you see, Peter's very special, so he's mentioned especially because he's the prince of the apostles. But that's not the case. His disciples and Peter really literally means this, that he was not a disciple because he had denied Christ. He ceased to be a disciple. The angel says it this way, yes, because Peter denied him, yeah, and so he's not included with the others. Now, the other thing, he is going before you into Galilee. What does this mean? Now, according to Luke, the angel reminds the women that the Lord told them when he was still in Galilee about the events of the last few days. The apostles, as also most of the Lord's followers, were from Galilee. They were at the feast of the Passover in Jerusalem only temporarily, and then they would go back to Galilee. The sense of the angel's words is that before they return to Galilee from Jerusalem, he will have risen from the dead. That's what he said to them before. The angel says that says this to get their mind away from Jerusalem, which was the scene of, the torments of Christ and their grief. So he says, Galilee reminds them of all those beautiful times they had together with Christ, and he was speaking to the around the lake, beautiful countryside. Yeah. So in Galilee, they would be more relaxed and secure. Yes, it was as if things were going back to normal as they were in the past and before. But the angel does not tell them how long the stage will last. Doesn't say for the next 40 days. Now, while the Lord would appear to the 11 in Jerusalem, it was important for him to see many other of his followers, his disciples in Galilee. In 1 Corinthians chapter 15, Paul lists the many witnesses of Christ risen from the dead, including, and I quote, over 500 brethren at once. Such a big crowd of his brethren or followers could only be in Galilee. Clearly such a, yes, they could only assemble in Galilee. How did the 11 receive the news from the women? Well, first of all, they did not believe them. The women themselves felt this dual emotion of joy on the one hand and fear as well. And their fear was still stronger than their joy. Mark says that they did not tell anyone because they were afraid. What this means is that the women were very careful on the way back from the tomb, that they didn't tell any people that they met, and they only spoke to the disciples about what they saw and heard. Okay, so now we read about Mary Magdalene from John, chapter 20, from the beginning. Right? Oh. Now, the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb early while it was still dark and saw that the stone had been taken away from the tomb. Then she ran and came to Simon Peter and to the other disciples whom Jesus loved and said to them, "They have taken away the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they have laid him." Peter therefore went out and the other disciple and were going to the tomb. So they both ran together, and the other disciple outran Peter and came to the tomb first. And he, stooping down and looking in, saw the linen cloths lying there, yet he did not go in. Then Simon Peter came, following him, and went into the tomb, and he saw the linen cloths lying there, and the handkerchief that had been around his head, not lying with the linen cloths, but folded together in a place by itself. So that clearly indicates that the body was not stolen, because why would they bother folding it neatly? Then the other disciple who came to the tomb first went in also, and he saw and believed, for as yet they did not know the scripture, that he must rise again from the dead. Then the disciples went away again to their own homes. But Mary stood outside by the tomb weeping, and as she wept, she stooped down and looked into the tomb, and she saw two angels in white sitting, one at the head and the other at the feet, where the body of Jesus had lain. Then they said to her, Woman, why are you weeping? She said to them, Because they have taken away my Lord, and I do not know where they have laid him. Now, when she had said this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there and did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to her, Woman, why are you weeping? Whom are you seeking? She, supposing him to be the gardener, said to him, Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have laid him, and I will take him away. Seems crazy that she said, one person could not have taken a woman. How is she going to take it? But she's in a lot of grief. Jesus said to her, Mary. She turned and said to him, Rabboni, which is to say, teacher. Jesus said to her, Do not cling to me, for I have not yet ascended to my Father. But go to my brethren and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, and my God, to my God and your God. I don't think I've put down in my notes that that's an important thing that he says, my God, your God and my God, because he's trying to teach them that, teach her that his relationship with the Father is very different to their relationship. Okay? My God, he knows the Father like nobody. Mary Magdalene came and told the disciples that she had seen the Lord and that he had spoken these things to her. Okay, we have discussed earlier the movements of Mary Magdalene that morning. As she went and left together with a whole group of myrrh bearers, but ran ahead, found the empty tomb, and rushed back to tell Peter and John that the body had been removed. Peter and John rushed to the tomb, and John, being a young man, Peter was like about 20 years older. He would have been in his early 40s. He was the oldest of all the 12 disciples. And John was only 21 at that time. So, of course, he outran him. He reached the tomb, but was reluctant to enter first. He was a bit scared. Peter, the stronger sort of like older man, went inside, and so then John felt comfortable about following him. They saw the linen clothes folded neatly. Peter was surprised, while John saw and believed. He saw the neatness, how they were folded, and thought, wow, this can't be something unusual, fishy. It's in the Lord. Having seen the empty tomb, the men went back, but Mary stayed behind, crying about the disappearance of the body. While she was crying, she noticed the two angels, but because she was so sad, that feeling overwhelmed any surprise that she may have had at seeing two angels there. Now she treats them like a couple of human beings. That normally we'll see from the Bible that in the Old Testament, anyone who saw an angel, like for instance, the father of John the Baptist, was shocked because they believe that if you see an angel, it means you're going to die. You're going to die soon. All right. When Mary sees the Lord, she thinks he is the gardener, but he calls her by her name, and she's overjoyed and rushes to embrace his feet. Now the Lord begins to educate her, and through her the disciples, that now their relationship has to change. He says, do not touch me, not because it's impossible. He will offer to Thomas in a week's time to touch him, touch his wounds. He speaks of the ascension and says, do not cling to me. That is, do not attempt to restrain me from disappearing, going to the Father. I have to ascend to the Father, but not yet. Jesus Christ implies that he will be seeing her and the disciples for a while yet. So it's important for the Lord to gently teach her that he could no longer be that humble teacher of Galilee. Now that he has come into his glory, okay, and he's not hiding his divinity under this veil that he did not lift except for one time on Mount Tabor to the three disciples. After seeing Mary Magdalene, the Lord appears to the other myrrh bearers, mentioned in Matthew, say, chapter 27, verses 9 to 10, who are overjoyed, and he tells them to tell the disciples to go back to Galilee, where he will see them. Okay, the next little topic is from Matthew chapter 28, 11 to 15. Matthew 28, 11 to 15. Now, while they were going, that's referring actually to the myrrh bearers. Behold, some of the guard came into the city and reported to the chief priests all the things that had happened. When they had assembled with the elders and consulted together, they gave a large sum of money to the soldiers, saying, tell them his disciples came at night and stole him away while we slept. And if this comes to the governor's ears, we will appease him and make you secure. So they took the money and did as they were instructed. And this saying is commonly reported among the Jews until this day. Yes, the guards were so terrified that they became like dead, as we read before. Then they came to their senses and ran into the city and told the priests about what happened. So the priest teach them to lie, giving them a large amount of money, a large sum of money. They tell them to say that the body was stolen by the disciples as they were sleeping. And to make sure that the soldiers would not be afraid to spread such a version, they give them, give them this money. And by the way, why would the soldiers be afraid to spread such a rumor? Well, because it was very dangerous for them to admit such a thing, that they actually fell asleep. You know that in the Roman army, if a soldier on guard duty was found sleeping, he'd be executed immediately. The discipline was horrific. The Romans prided themselves on one general executing his own son because he disobeyed an order. He says, it's hard for me to do it, but if I don't, it'll set a bad example, because his son disobeyed an order. He was a younger officer, a more junior officer. Yes, they knew that they risk being executed if they admitted to falling asleep. But the priest explained to the soldiers, don't worry about it. We'll if it gets to the governor, we'll take care of it. Which would mean that they would give the governor quite a bit of money to keep quiet and not to do anything. So they had nothing to fear. So the rumor spread and was believed among those who did not believe in Christ before. Jesus Christ, of course, couldn't ensure that everyone believed by appearing publicly. He doesn't do that. Could you imagine what sort of a furor would cause if he appeared publicly in Jerusalem after, and they wouldn't be able to do anything with him because he was indestructible now. They couldn't do anything to him. But he doesn't do that, and he doesn't want to use his divine power to force people to believe. Right. And that, of course, is the reason for his ascension, as I've said on a number of occasions before. He cannot stay, because if he stays after those 40 days, appearing just to his faithful disciples, he's going to be putting pressure on people who otherwise would not have believed. Okay, so now the story of the two men walking to Emmaus. So that's in Luke chapter 24, quite a long story, verses 12 to 49. Right. Luke. Now behold, two of them were traveling that same day to a village called Emmaus, which was 7 miles from Jerusalem. Now, for those of you that don't understand what 7 miles means, it's about 12 kilometers. That's 60 furlongs. A furlong is just over 200 meters. And they talked together of all these things which happened. So it was while they conversed and reasoned that Jesus himself drew near and went with them, but their eyes were restrained. So they could not, so that they did not know him. And he said to them, "What kind of conversation is that you have with one another as you walk and are sad?" Then one whose name was Cleopas answered and said to him. Now, Luke doesn't mention his own name because John often does the same thing. And he talks about himself in the third person without naming himself. Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem, and have you not known the things which happened there in these days? And he said to them, "What things?" So they said to him, "The things concerning Jesus of Nazareth, who is a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, and how the chief priests and our rulers delivered him to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we were hoping that it was he who was going to redeem Israel. Indeed, besides all this, today is the third day since these things happened. Yes, and certain women of our company who arrived at the tomb early astonished us. When they did not find his body, they came saying that they also had seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. And certain of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but him they did not see." Then he said to them, "O foolish ones and slow of heart to believe in all things that the prophets have spoken. Ought not the Christ to have suffered these things and to enter into his glory?" And beginning at Moses and all the prophets, he expounded to them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. Then they drew near to the village where they were going, and he indicated that he would have gone farther But they restrained him, saying, "Abide with us, for it is toward evening, and the day is fast spent." And he went in to stay with them. Now it came to pass, as he sat at the table with them, that he took bread, blessed it, and broke it, and he gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they knew him, and he vanished from their sight. Just 14. No, it's not. I said it was 12 to 49, but it's less than that. It's 49 with the next topic. Yes, they said to one another, oh, wait a minute. Then their eyes were opened, they knew him, and he vanished from their sight. And they said one to another, "Did not our heart burn within us while he talked with us on the road and while he opened the scriptures to us?" So they rose up and that very hour and returned to Jerusalem and found the 11 and those who were with them gathered together, saying, "The Lord is risen indeed and has appeared to Simon." And they were told about the things that had happened on the road and how he was known to them in the breaking of bread. So, in addition to Luke's detailed story, Mark also gives the essential details. First of all, the two disciples were on their way to a village, and Christ appeared to them in another form. Mark says, however, that when these two came back and told the disciples in Jerusalem, they did not believe. In Luke's account, we read that when Cleopas and the other disciple, which as I said, Luke himself, when they came back, the 10 disciples, it should be really, because we know from John that Thomas wasn't there, said that the Lord had appeared to Simon. Why did the 10 disciples doubt what Peter and now Luke and Cleopas said? Well, first of all, they were so crushed by the events of the recent days that the news of the resurrection seemed so fantastic to them. And possibly they believed Peter, and they joyfully said this to Luke and Cleopas. But then when the two mentioned where Christ appeared to them, they could not understand how Christ could be in two different places at the same time, separated by some distance, 12 kilometers. All right. Now, I mentioned in my sermon today about Zwingli, one of the Swiss reformers. He belonged generally, the Swiss reformers were a bit more radical than, say, Martin Luther in the Reformation, and so they did not believe in the real presence, that the bread and the wine are the body and blood of Christ. And the argument that Zwingli advanced was this. Was very radical Nestorian, that Christ, once he assumed the human body, that body could only be in one place at any one time. So it could not be in a chalice somewhere else. And so for that reason, he couldn't accept this idea that it was the true body and blood of Christ. All right. So had he thought about this particular part of the gospel thoughtfully, he would have realized that it is possible. Yes, the appearance of Jesus Christ to Peter is also mentioned by Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter. But neither he nor Luke give any details how Christ appeared to Peter. Now, along the way to Emmaus, Luke and Cleopas do not refer to Jesus Christ as the Messiah. They say they'd call him a prophet, great in strength. It means that it seems that this reflects the state of their spirit, because their hopes were crushed by the events. They crushed him, in believing that he was the Christ, the Messiah. They point out that the people were on the side of Christ, and that he was given over by the priests and rules to be executed. Christ then berates them for this obtuseness of mind and heart, and gives a detailed overview of the scriptures and their prophecies. The 2 disciples of the 70 were so excited by what he had said that they begged him to stay with them for a meal. Having agreed to share a meal, then Christ behaves not as their guest, but as the host. He takes charge of this. They immediately recognize him because of his behavior, his blessing and breaking of the bread. Their eyes were opened, we hear, and they recognize him. Was this blessing and breaking of bread a Eucharist? Well, according to St. John Chrysostom and Blessed Augustine, it was. They say to themselves, to each other on the way back, did not our heart burn within us when he spoke to us on the way? Luke and Cleopas were disappointed that they had not recognized him earlier. Who else could explain the scriptures in the way that this mysterious man did? Only the Lord could. And if we remember the scene when he's 12 years old in the temple, the professors of the law of the Bible are amazed how this boy understands the scriptures. Jesus appears to the 10 disciples. That's our next topic. In Luke, we just continue. 24 from verses 36 to 49 now. Yes. Now, as they said these things, Jesus himself stood in the midst of them and said to them, "Peace to you." But they were terrified and frightened, and supposed that they had seen a spirit. And he said to them, "Why are you troubled? And why do doubts arise in your hearts? Behold my hands and my feet, that it is myself. Handle me and see, for a spirit does not have flesh and bones as you have, as you see I have." When he had said this, he showed them his hands and his feet. But while they still did not believe for joy and marveled, he said to them, "Have you any food here?" So they gave him a piece of a broiled fish and some honeycomb, and he took it and ate it in their presence. Then he said to them, "These are the words which I spoke to you while I was still with you, that all things must be fulfilled which were written in the law of Moses and the prophets and the Psalms concerning me." And he opened their understanding that they might comprehend the scriptures. Then he said to them, "Thus it is written, and thus it was necessary for the Christ to suffer and to rise from the dead third day, and that repentance and remission of sins should be preached in his name to all nations, beginning at Jerusalem. And you are witnesses of all of these things. Behold, I send the promise of my Father upon you, but tarry in the city of Jerusalem until you are endued with the power from on high." Hmm. Right. Um, the image seems to be a little bit washed out of focus. Is this okay? Right. So the Lord appeared to the two disciples. I'm sorry. It was toward the evening when the Lord appeared to these two disciples on the road to Emmaus. They immediately turned back and walked 12 kilometers to Jerusalem, telling excitedly uh, that about seeing the Lord, telling the others. No sooner had they finished their story when Christ appeared to the whole group together. He greets them with peace, but they are terrified, thinking that he was a ghost, thinking he was a ghost. He's a ghost, and that in the beginning of this episode in Luke. That is the beginning of the episode in Luke. John um, seemingly speaks of the same event, the same appearance of the Lord on the evening of the first day, but adds that he adds that in the evening of the first day of the week, when the disciples were assembled in a room with locked doors for the fear of the Jews, John adds that Thomas was not with them. So there were actually 10. Luke says 11. Um, uh, so there are little, if you go through New Testament, there are little minor sort of discrepancies and errors, which are fine. It shows that it was written by human beings. It's not a dictation from above. Yes, Mark also describes this event at the end of his gospel, but does not say that it was the first day of the week. Mark, while not mentioning the day, says that it was after the appearance of the Lord to the two disciples in the country, and that they were the 10. Well, the group of the others were having a meal. The group of the from the 12 were having a meal. Luke asks that because they were frightened of a ghost, Christ asked them for food to eat, and they gave him broiled fish and honeycomb. Tell you something funny. In the original King James version, which we use as the English text for reading in church on Saturday nights, this is one of the 11 Matins resurrection gospel passages. Says that Jesus said, "Do you have any meat?" And I remember a long time ago, around the time of his ordination, Father Nicholas Delinkovich said, "Well, that's not fair. He asking them for meat, and they offer him fish." But see, the thing is that in Old English, the word meat did not mean what it means now. It could refer to any food. Okay, and here's a couple of sayings in the English language that point this out. For instance, as full as an egg, I'm as full as an egg is as full as an egg is of meat. That's one. And one man's meat is another man's poison. It just refers to food. Okay, that's just something. So it was the same event, the same first appearance of Jesus Christ to his disciples in Mark and Luke, because Christ in both cases reproaches them for their unbelief and hardness of heart. As far as for the things that Christ said to his disciples on this occasion, it is clear that Mark and Luke did not intend to describe all the appearances of the Lord, and there could have been many of them over the 40-day period. Right? We hear in the book of Acts, in chapter 1, he also presented himself alive to the apostles, that is, after his suffering, by many infallible proofs, being seen by them during the 40 days and speaking of the things pertaining to the kingdom of God. So it implies that would have seen them, quite a number of times. The intention of Mark and Luke is to bring the story of Christ to the point where the disciples are convinced fully that he is indeed the same Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified, died, and buried, and now is risen from the dead. Okay. Nevertheless, they want to describe, at least in general terms, what he spoke to them about during the 40 days. That is the kingdom of God and how it will be made manifest on earth. For that reason, they add to this occasion other things that Jesus Christ had said, especially his last appearance, which he said on other occasions, especially his last appearance, which Luke describes in greater detail in chapter 1 of the Acts. For example, Luke mentions in this context Christ's instruction to remain in Jerusalem until they receive the power from above. And this was only said on the day of his ascension. It wasn't said on the first day of his resurrection. It's sort of really compact there in Mark and Luke, the description of that appearance on the first day. They jam a lot of things into it. But before this, they were told to go back to Galilee at the completion of the Passover feast in Jerusalem. And that, of course, lasted for 7 days. Once the feast was finished, then they would go back to Jerusalem. And there are, further meetings there, which we will be discussing next time. This first appearance addressed the following. First of all, to confirm without doubt Christ's resurrection. So this first appearance, to restore them in their status as the apostles, messengers of Christ, because while they didn't go as far as Peter did in denying Christ, they abandoned him. Well, they promised that they would not. They just ran for their life. The last point hints at what he actually spoke to them about at the first meeting, or first appearance, rather. So after his blessing, he reproaches them for unbelief and not accepting the stories of those who had seen him, such as Mary Magdalene and the other women, although they had not actually, the others had not seen Jesus personally, but they had seen the angels and so on, and they'd seen the empty tomb. Then there was Peter and Luke and Cleopas. Okay? He points out that while this was incredibly unexpected, to them in their state, the resurrection, but yet it was the fulfillment of the prophecies of the law, the prophets, and the Psalms. To enable them to believe fully themselves and from the prophecies of the Bible, he gives them the gift of comprehending the scriptures. They're now able to understand scriptures in the way that they would not understand them before. And of course, this led to a proliferation of New Testament commentaries on the Old Testament Bible in the generations to come. Right, because they had received this gift, but it was passed on to the church from them as well. He gives them another blessing of peace, according to John, and then commands them to go into the world and to preach the gospel to all nations. So this is also in Luke, as we read, and John. In chapter 20, as the Father has sent me, I also send you. That is, they are meant to be the presence of God in the world, like Jesus Christ was the presence of God in the world. Right, because Christ is with them until the end of the ages, he promised. He's with the apostles, he's with the church. Yes, but we will look at this point in more detail next time when we consider the topic of the Great Commission, which is the last passage, the last paragraph of Matthew's Gospel, and which is also one of the resurrectional Matthew Gospels. Yes, the first one. In John, Jesus Christ blows towards them, giving them the grace of the Holy Spirit to bind and loose. He has spoken to them much earlier about facilitating reconciliation with the church and forgiveness of sins. Now remember, many weeks ago, when we're looking at Matthew chapter 18, we came across these words: whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Okay, so this topic was already prepared, but now Christ actually gives them the authority to do so, an authority that is passed down through the apostolic succession, that is, through the laying on of hands in ordination, in the sacramental mystery of the priesthood. Okay, from the apostles to the bishops to the hierarchs, and the priests being the sheepdogs of the shepherds. They receive this gift as well. All right, do we have any questions there? No, so far. No? Okay. All right. Well, look, this is pretty good. We covered a lot of ground. And as I said, we will probably just need one more session to finish the 4 Gospels. And then we'll cover some other topics, and we'll begin the big journey through the book of Acts and the letters of the apostles. There's so much there, and we'll see the gospel coming alive, because now it's, the ideas of the gospel are being expanded and commented on, in a very practical way. All right. Okay. So if there's no more questions, nothing else to say, you'll hear from our secretary, Costa, through the email messages about our next session, but it will not be until sometime after Easter. So my apologies. That's it just happens every year like that, just before Easter. And a little bit after, can't do anything. All right, it is truly meet to bless thee, Theotokos, ever blessed and most pure, the mother of our God, more honorable than the cherubim, beyond compare, more glorious than the seraphim, without corruption gave us birth to God, the word, true Theotokos, to thee that we magnify.